Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, November 15th, 2020. This is the weekly market update. This week's update won't be that extensive just because I wasn't able to gather too much information, really busy week, and not a lot of market flow, but some important things did take place this week, and I will get into those. Okay, and the reality check. I thought this was an excellent slide. Why? Because it shows the percentage share of income gains during economic expansions that occur that went to basically the top 1% and bottom 99% of earners. And what you can see here is as the decades have went by, you've had more and more of the income gains going to the top 1%, okay? And you've had less and less income gains going to the bottom 99%. One thing I will note is right around in 1971 is when Nixon closed the gold window. Am I suggesting that that's the only reason why income gains have went majority-wise to the upper 1%? No, but I think it has a big impact. Why? Because as we got off a gold standard, as we got off a methodology to control government and to control central banks, we entered a period of financialization of the markets. We entered a period where government realized that it could use created money, created out of thin air, to advance its own political agenda, for politicians to give people things and not have to pay for them. And when you create money out of thin air, when you have an inflationary mindset, the people at the top get their hands on the money first, okay? They're the ones that have assets. They're the ones that have access. They get the money first and they're able to put it to work. If you're a plumber working for some plumbing company, you don't have access to the Federal Reserve market system or desk or the New York Fed and are able to do little deals and trade your treasury bills in for, cash that you can deploy into the stock market or some leverage schemes that you're running. And obviously, we've seen this is my view. And, we've created this, I've said it before, people hear what they want to hear on these videos that I make, but I'm against the entire political class, whether it's Republican, Democrat, whatever. These people have created an oligarchy and they have created a partnership with large businesses, big business, wealthy people, connected people. They all went to the same schools. They all go to the same clubs. They all are pretty much in the same cities, Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, L.A., and they all mingle. They all, do things for their benefit. They give each other's kids jobs. I mean, it goes on and on. You think, the center of financial, bigness is not, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Peoria, Illinois, or Shreveport, Louisiana. And, we're getting to a point now where, they don't know what to do. Things are spinning out of control. They're trying to keep the game going, but they're still creaming off profits. They're still creaming off more for themselves. We've talked about it before. It goes everything from the creation of these crooked special purpose vehicles where the Treasury creates these vehicles, the Fed finances them, they're out buying corporate junk bonds. Obviously, people on Wall Street knew well in advance what they were going to do because they front ran the Fed, okay? Don't sit there and tell me that guys that went to Wharton Business School together, and one works at the Fed, at the New York Fed trading desk, and one that works at Goldman Sachs, they don't talk. Well, you bought that, not me. And, they've allowed to turn this political stuff into a us versus them football game, basketball game, where I'm on one team and you're on the other, and it distracts from what's really happening. Like I said, it's easier to understand good guy, white hat, black hat, good guy, bad guy, than it is to understand how the Federal Reserve System works, to understand how finance works. Most people are just not capable, nor do they have an interest. And so they have a cartoon version of what's going on. What I'm trying to get to here is that this is not going to change, okay? And you're going to see as we go forward, what I thought was interesting from this election, whether you like the results or don't like the results, is that, bad orange man bad represented populism. He represented people that felt they didn't have a voice. He had 72 million people vote for him. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, votes that were gotten by a incumbent president. And he still lost, it looks like, although we don't really know the outcome. But it looks like he's going to lose. Those people aren't going away. Their frustrations aren't going away. They're not going to be happy with what's going on. And the problem is people are looking to the political class to fix these things, and it's not going to happen. I mean, the whole edifice needs to be torn down, and that's not going to happen from voting. So I see continued disparities here. This isn't going to get changed because you have a 50-year, oligarch, representative of the oligarchy in there now. Joe Biden is not an agent for change. He's going to keep the status quo. You'll see some marginal things. Let's take oil and gas, for example. This is not going to ban fracking on maybe federal lands and not issue new leases, but they're not going to come across and just do it flat. I mean, oil prices would go over $100 a barrel in a week. It's not going to happen. So these people are the kind of people that if you give them money, they get in bed. That's what they do. You can deny it, you can not view it that way, but they're all like that. That's how they get elected. They have to take in money. Go look, it's public knowledge. I mean, they give you this information. They laugh in your face, people. They think you're dumb. Go look at who gives money to all these politicians that you worship. It's not, small donors with $18 average contributions. It's very big corporations and PACs and organized people that want something for the money that they give. They're not doing it because they think these politicians, whether it's Mitch McConnell or, Chuck Schumer, they're so wonderful. They're going to do such great things. Such a charismatic figure. No, they want something for the money that they're giving. And the things that they want are not what's necessarily beneficial for the majority. And this is going to continue regardless of who's in there. Okay. And until it gets to a point where it can't continue. Now, I don't know where that is, but, this is going to get worse, not better. And what you're going to see is more tumultuous political outcomes or elections or whatever, because you're going to have this constant shifting back and forth of between left and right, but it's going to be from a populist bent, okay, as the oligarchy tries to hold on to its power, to hold on to its wealth. But there's a seismic shifts happening under them, and they were able to get away with it this time, but they barely did. I mean, Joe Biden barely won, if he wins. That party lost seats to the Republicans. The Senate wasn't taken. There's really no mandate there. And you're seeing more and more populism, more and more division growing in the country. And it all comes back to this, in my view. Okay. People vote with their pocketbooks. All these other issues are secondary. That doesn't mean they're not important, but ultimately, if you can't put food on the table and you're living in the street, that kind of takes precedent over your views on the Second Amendment or free speech. So, I expect more, like I said, more swings of populism back and forth and people getting more angry, but I'm not sure it's going to get manifested in real change, political change that's going to affect people's lives in a positive way. But we'll see. What doesn't change, regardless of who's in there, is that the U.S. is piling up record budget deficits. Treasury Department reported on Thursday that the federal government ran up a record October deficit of $284 billion, double the red ink of the same month a year ago, as revenues declined while spending to deal with the impact of the coronavirus soared. You may not know, or you will recall if you do know, that the government's fiscal year starts in October. So it goes from October of 2020 to September of 2021. So this is the first month of the new fiscal year, and you already have a $284 billion deficit, and the deficit was double the $134 billion deficit logged in October 2019. It smashed the previous October record of 176 billion set in 2009. You will recall that was the last time we had a financial crisis. That was the year after the great financial crisis, when the government was spending heavily to lift the country out of a deep recession caused by the 2008 financial crisis. Look, these people don't know what to do, okay? They may or may not have made the right calls around the virus, which must not be named on YouTube because the algorithm will ban you. But, you know, they're calling, some places are locking down again. You have to look at, it's like Bastiat said. Frederick Bastiat was a French economist back in the 18th century. It's easy to say, well, we're just going to lock things down and people's, ignore the secondary and third level effects of doing that, which is people's businesses, job losses. People still have to exist. And this idea that we could just create money out of thin air and give it to people and rack up these deficits, we can do that. Yes, in fact, we can do that until we can't. As the character in the Hemingway novel said, was asked, how did you go broke? Very slowly and then all at once. And that's how these things manifest. We have, unfortunately, a new cohort of economists that are propagandizing a way of thinking called MMT, modern monetary theory, that the deficits don't matter. We can do these things. We can reshape society. We can do the right thing for people because we create our own currency. We can just create as much currency as we need to for programs to help people, to make things better for people. And that sounds great, but where in history has that worked? So all throughout monetary history for the last 5,000 years, everybody got it wrong until this new cohort of enlightened people came along. And this is the typical Goss plan, the typical arrogant thinking of the elites. This is going to be a problem at some point, people. Okay, we've got to get this stuff under control. They're talking about now, analysts are saying you could have a budget deficit this year, in this fiscal year, of anywhere between $3 and $5 trillion. That could be 25%, 20 to 25% of GDP, on top of the almost $30 trillion in debt we have. And now people ask me or are insistent that interest rates can go up. How high can the deficits go? How high can the balance sheet of the Fed go to accommodate this? I mean, Felix Zuhoff, who's a Swiss financial guy, very wise guy, used to be on the Barron's Roundtable. He thinks that the Fed's balance sheet could go to $30 to $40 trillion over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, this is astronomical. And how you cannot think that hard assets are in gold and Bitcoin and things that cannot be inflated. I mean, even baseball cards or Ford Mustangs, antique cars, all this stuff's going up in value because this money's being created at like breakneck speeds. There's going to be a package. There's going to be more spending after we get through this election stuff. Maybe not in the lame duck session, but early next, probably late January, early February. In the starting point is 2.2 trillion. They're talking, and the Democrats want more. Nancy Pelosi and Schumer want like $3.5 trillion. So you're going to get something regardless of who's the president or how things shake out. And then you're talking about having more lockdowns, but nobody is trying to assess the unseen effects and what that means. And then you're being told by these new cohorts of academics like Stephanie Kelton that these things don't matter. As long as we don't have inflation, we can do this. Yeah, but at what point do you get inflation? I mean, you can't just create unlimited amounts of currency units. This is why these hard assets like gold, even though it's pulled back recently, it's 1850, 1880, whatever it's at. So this is just for the first month of the fiscal year. You have a record budget deficit and no one cares. No one talks about it. And that's what's really scary, is that no one in government now, everybody's on board with spending more money. It's just the amount. There is no break on this. Nobody's trying to pull back on the reins. Oops. Okay, here's something I wanted to point out. I've been harping on this for a while. I got this off Twitter. This is why I say you should be on Twitter. This is a showing you the growth stocks as based in the red line with the MSCI World Growth Index, and the blue line is the value market. Is going, and what you see is these rubber bands. Basically, somebody placed this on here, affecting that these things get to extremes, as you can see in the past, and they snap back. Growth or value will outperform the other. You will see that back here in 99, 2000, during the tech bubble, you had growth really outperforming value, and you see it snapped back here. And then value outperformed and growth underperformed for a long time. Value outperformed, and then the same thing. It snapped back, and now growth has outperformed massively, and value has underperformed massively. And the supposition here, or the view, is that this is going to reverse. That's what I've been saying. That's the whole basis of the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter, that we think that we're at extremes, and that these extremes don't last, and that things, when they outperform for a significant amount of times, they have a tendency to return to the mean and then underperform. And conversely, things that underperform have a tendency to return to the mean and then outperform. We've seen that in the past. Now, this isn't the whole history of the market. This only goes back for a couple, till 95. But I think that when we talked about the 10 rules of investing with Bob Farrell, this is one of the things he talked about. You're talking about, going back 40, 50 years, market wisdom. So something to keep an eye on when it comes to cyclical extremes. Arguably, nothing compares to the current day. And I would suggest that that's true. And what I wanted to point out here was, in the last week, energy, this is the XLE. It's a representation of the basically your larger energy stocks. And you can see we had this big gap up earlier in the week. This was announcement, or maybe it was earlier in the week, I believe, based on the announcement of the coronavirus vaccine and its efficacy, supposed efficacy. And so obviously that got people thinking, well, energy demand will come back as the economy comes back. Look, I think as Winston Churchill said, World War II is kind of apropos here, possibly. We're not at the end, but we're at the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning. So, we got a long way to go on this. But I think that you're seeing a lot of fatigue around this coronavirus. You're seeing more and more vaccines, more and more treatments. And I think, over time, even though you have like Biden talking about the possibility of a national lockdown, I mean, it's up to the states, and most of the states are not going to go along with it. Really, people have had enough of it. They want to get back to work. They want to get back to their lives. And, but we'll see. We don't know, right? And I think that energy is really, really undervalued relative to the narrative. And just wanted to point this out. It's one of our main themes going forward over the next 3 to 5 years. This is something I wanted to point out in the news. I have a stock in the Actionable Intelligence newsletter. It's a metallurgical coal miner in Mongolia. And stock really popped in the last few weeks. And I was looking into why that was, because it was just kind of dead money. But basically what's happened here is coal exports from Mongolia, which borders China to its north, surged by 17% to 4.65 million tons last month. More than 96% of those shipments were destined for China, making Mongolia the largest metallurgical coal supplier to the country. According to S&P, shipments from Mongolia to China rose to a record pace in September, jumping by over a quarter month on month, and more than 8% compared to a year earlier. And why this is because there's ongoing tensions between Australia and China. And Australia was the major supplier, or one of the major suppliers of met coal and many other things, agricultural commodities, all kinds of commodities, iron ore, a lot of stuff, barley, wheat, everything. And the Chinese have really, said, hey, we don't want any more of your products, basically. And what I'm getting to you here is that, we've had tensions between Australia and its largest trading partner have been flaring for around 3 years, since Canberra alleged that there was a growing Chinese influence on its domestic affairs, a claim repeatedly denied by Beijing. In 2018, the Australian government added fuel to the fire as it banned China's Huawei and ZTE from the country's 5G rollout. This is what you're going to see going forward. The United States, the West, is waning in power. China is ascending. It's flexing its muscles now. It's going to flex itself geopolitically and politically in its area of influence, and you're starting to see it right here with Australia. We don't need your products. We are your largest trading partner, China says. You will bend the knee. I mean, it's not that overt, but that's the message. And we can put the pain to you, okay? Because we can buy things from everywhere else. When you have a market of 1.3 billion people, you can get met coal. You don't have to get met coal from Australia. You can get it from Mongolia, Indonesia, Canada. And this is increasingly, I think, this is what the U.S. did for 100 years when it was the world hegemon, or still basically is, but it's waning in its power. And as China ascends, you're going to see it manifest its power. And I don't believe it's going to be as benevolent as the U.S. many people may have thought it was. Look, these governments, all of them are infested with sociopaths. They are intent on gaining more power and wealth to themselves. And if you think the Chinese are going to be encumbered at all by what academics in the West or people at commentators at CNN think, you're out of your mind, okay? And this is not currently, I mean, it is actionable. It's going to be further actionable as we go forward. The Chinese have invested a tremendous amount of money in Central Asia, Africa, places like this, to grab as many resources as they can to create relationships where they build ports, infrastructure, and then they get their tentacles into the politics of the host country. And you're going to see more of that. And they're going to flex their muscles. And if you cut them out of markets, if you try to do things, if you try to hold them accountable for how they treat their Muslim population in the West, or the Uyghurs or whatever, they don't care what you think. And what are you going to do? This is going to be interesting, as we go forward and the West further goes into decline, and we have this whole zeitgeist. I'm just using this as an example, but I can see this going forward. It's like, okay, you're going to cut CO2 emissions and really deindustrialize the West, but most of the emissions come from China and India. What are you going to do? How are you going to make China do this? I mean, they're paying lip service now, but they're just laughing and continuing on as the West, performs ritual seppuku to its economy. You're going to force them how to do what? How are you going to do that? They're becoming stronger. We're becoming weaker. This is just one example. This isn't a one-off. This is going to be more of the norm. And so as a speculator, you can take advantage of this. This particular coal miner that I have in Mongolia is looking pretty good now. It's extremely cheap. It's about 1 times earnings or less, and their sales are surging now because, we don't need to get coal from Australia. We'll just get it from Mongolia. Mongolia will play ball. So I think that's what you're going to see is opportunities like that. That's the whole point of this. I'm not going to get into the merits of whether this is good, bad, or whatever. What I'm telling you is it's happening, and there's ways to take advantage of it, because you're not going to fix it. What are you going to do? Go and protest in front of the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C.? They don't care. Wanted to point this out. This is what people don't think about. We're hearing, more hype around various energy sources or methods of energy transfer. And you really have to look at, a very important metric in my mind is, what energy do I get for the energy that I invest? Energy is invested in and manifested in everything that we do, from farming to transportation to industrial processes, whatever. And the value added product that you get out, if it's worth more than the energy you put in, then it has an economic value. If you are destroying value in the process of some political goal that doesn't make engineering or economic sense, then it's not sustainable. And this is an example. There's ways to get, hydrogen's being touted as a way to get us off fossil fuels and be CO2, this whole thing around CO2. So this is a process right here, electrolysis. This is where you take water and split the atoms and separate the hydrogen atoms from the oxygen atoms. Because you need to understand something. There are no like hydrogen reserves that you can go drill and pull out of the earth. Hydrogen can be obtained from breaking down hydrocarbons like oil, coal, natural gas, methane, things like that, or you can get it through electrolysis. And so you have to take electricity from these various sources, wind power, solar power if you want, nuclear power plant, whatever. You bring in the water, so you need 50 kilowatts of electricity that you put into the process. And out of this, you get 1 kilogram of hydrogen and 9 kilograms of oxygen. The oxygen is just released into the atmosphere. Then you can take that hydrogen, you can either run it through a fuel cell to create electrical power, or you can go into a gas turbine and have a combined cycle situation where you turn a generator to create electricity and then take the waste heat and use that for processes. Long story short, if you put 50 kilowatts of electricity in the front end to split the 10 liters of water, in the end, you only get 15 kilowatts of electricity out the back end and 15 kilowatts of heat energy if you run it through a gas turbine. You're basically, this is a lose situation. You're putting in more energy than you're getting out the back end. So this is not a solution that people think, because hydrogen is not, like I said, it's not an existing in large quantities. We can just go drill it out of the ground. It's tied up in other molecules. It has to be split off. And so, this is being touted by many people. Now, will it improve with technology? I'm sure it will, but you still can't get over that fact, right? And then, hydrogen is very hard to store. People say, well, it's a way to store, look on the front end of this, it's a way to store wind and solar power that are intermittent. The problem with that is that hydrogen is very hard to store. It has to be stored at either very high pressures, and the containment for that is it still leaks, okay? It's very hard to hold it in, and or at very, very low temperatures, and that costs even more energy. So that has to be factored in. So you have to be careful when you hear these things that you deep dive them and say, okay, I think a guy that wrote a book. I'm going to try to get him on the show, Alex Epstein, he was writing about fossil fuels. Hazelnuts are a very energy intensive. You can crush hazelnuts and get certain oils out of them and run, a diesel car off it. But the problem is that the amount of hazelnuts that you would need to power all of the diesel powered trucks and everything, it's not possible to do that. Just because something is engineering, you can do it in a laboratory, it's feasible with a couple of nerds doing this in a lab. Does it scale, and is it economic? This is why it's very difficult to get away from fossil fuels. It's not because I love fossil fuels or I love pollution or I love all the, I just don't get it. We use them because they are easy to use. They are very a lot of energy is compacted in there. Okay. And that's the problem. That's why nuclear, if you really are up on, pollution and CO2, you really got to be a nuclear advocate. You need more dense energy sources, not less dense. That's the problem. And that's the problem here. So you need to be careful when you're looking at these things. You need to remove the biases and just not read an article where somebody touts something like this. And then you say, well, wait a minute, I'm getting less out of this than I put in. I mean, that's not sustainable. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Appreciate the support, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.